Hello and welcome to SHOWstudio. I'm Stavros and we're here to talk about one of the most anticipated shows of the season, Raf Simons and his automated teen collection that he just showcased in New York called Youth in Motion. Before we start talking about the phenomenon, the Belgian prodigy, the long-lasting career, and of course, an automated teen collection that featured the book by Cookie Muller and Glenn O'Brien called Drugs, as well as Christiane F. I would like to introduce the amazing set of panelists that are here with me today, starting with you, Mandi.
Hi, I'm Mandi Lennard and I run a fashion consultancy called Mandi's Basement.
I'm Karen Binns, I'm a stylist and creative director.
I'm Steve Sauter and I'm fashion features editor at ID Magazine.
I'm Andrew Davis and I'm a stylist.
So guys, thank you very, very much for being here today. And while I was coming here, I was start thinking about where we should start with talking about Raf Simons. And because obviously, you know, the beginning, everyone pretty much knows it. You know, he was born in Belgium. He didn't study fashion menswear design. He actually studied furniture industrial design in Ghent. He went and he did an internship with Walden Robert-Dong between 1991 and 1993. He saw a show, the Magella all-white show in 1991, and after Linda Lopa encouraged him to create his own brand, he started his own brand in 1995. Since then, he has remained independent. He's one of the very, very few designers that has remained independent until today. And I would like to ask your views on it, how important it is for a designer to be independent, and also I would like to throw 4 key words in the table, because you're 4 amazing panelists, and each one of you want to pick up 1 word and basically discuss the concept of independent together with that word. The 4 key words is isolation, creative freedom, time, and challenge or dare. So who would like to go first?
Mandy.
Well, as you know, isolation is my favourite word.
I love the word isolation, and Raf also loves the word isolation.
And I think, you know, even at this stage of his career where he's doing these incredible things, his work, you know, doing Calvin Klein, and everyone's anticipating his every move, he's still very much isolated. So he has his own independent brand, which I think he thrives on, and actually that is so important to him. So having his own independence creatively juxtaposed with having the creative responsibility for Calvin Klein, he wouldn't be able to do Calvin Klein if he didn't do his own independent label. And I find it amazing that, you know, all the hype beasts and everybody is so obsessed by Raf now. and you know, the way that they behave, it's almost like there's this new kid on the block.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, he's just been so enduring. And when he grew up, he was incredibly isolated, but that actually, when he saw glimmers and chinks in fashion's armour of things that excited him, not just fashion, but culturally, Peter Saville, all that kind of Hacienda era, punk. These are the things that really motivated him to kind of look, that kind of were signals to him that there was something out there that he could relate to and he could build on.
Do you think that, I mean, I completely agree with what you said, and lots of times I think about, because Raf Simons, obviously, he talks so much about youth culture and about youth overall. He has been super connected with young people all these years. Do you think the concept of isolation applies to young people today, or to young people overall?
I think it does. I mean, you know, everyone talking about mental health, one of the biggest things that's come out of all that is this idea of young men having depression and feeling, you know, those are all the symptoms of that. So I think that I can't remember the question.
Yeah, no. It's
How did we get
it's
onto
partly
mental
that. No. I was thinking about like you're absolutely right because we're talking about like young people as well and youth culture and you know how the concept of isolation applies to that. I mean, for lots of times, I think about young people and we all do it actually. You know that we in the morning we're going to put like our headphones and we won't like to stay in our own minds. But lots of times I think isolation is it's kind of reflected as something only negative, which I think there is a positive side to it, of course, right?
I think it's like us today, we were talking before about how we're kind of like the groupies. And I think that, that kind of excitement when you first go to a gig or a music concert and there's like merch and you had this incredible experience. When you got home, you've got the T-shirt that you bought there. And I think, he's no different. He's still that person, for sure.
It's that sense of belonging. I think throughout your adolescence, that's what you're striving for. You're striving to find your peers or group that you can really kind of
you want to
with.
belong to
and that's
a
what Raf
tribe,
did
don't
when he launched his label. I mean, he looked around the sort of the hyper sort of sexuality, sexed up man, like sort of buff guy in fashion as a hegemonic kind of ideal, and that wasn't what he related to. He was a kind of a skinny kid in Antwerp, and he was into punk. They were kind of outsiders in themselves, but they created something that that we're seeing echo throughout, right from the 80s right through to now.
I think sometimes it's important to know that, okay, you said isolation comes off negative. It's extremely positive.
I know.
Because it allows you to come up with an authentic idea.
Correct.
You don't always have to have a crew to come up with something that's valid or something that can change the way people think. And I think sometimes isolation is so important.
Especially from a creative and artistic point of view as well, because obviously he has done a book that's called Isolated Heroes with David Sims, but at the same time I think that the concept of isolation and sometimes isolated minds are strong minds. They can deal with a lot of things. Karen, what's the word that you're going to pick?
Time.
Time. Talk to me about time.
Time is so underrated. I think he has a lot of respect for time. The reason why I say that, it looks like he takes his time. He doesn't put everything and the kitchen sink into one thing. It looks like he understands, okay, I'm on the journey number 1, number 2, I'm Raf number 5, I'm Raf number 7, I'm Raf number 8. A lot of people make mistakes when they're trying to say, okay, I'm trying to make a statement as a creator. A creator must understand that there's so many levels of their creativity. That all needs time. And that's why I think he's so brilliant, because every time I see something that he's done or any collection that he's worked on, it looks like he's taking bits and pieces, and there's enough time that he has on this earth to be able to deliver all these different layers. And people underestimate that time is so important.
You're absolutely right, because in one of his interviews that he given at Sister Magazine, right after he left Dior, he talked a lot about the concept of time. He said that actually I didn't have enough time, to do the things the way that I want. And it wasn't about the ideas. He said that I have ideas. I know what I want to do. I know probably he knows what he wants to do for the next 10 years, but he wants to build the concept correctly. And I think the pressure of these big powerhouses sometimes is about time, and it's about how you allow people to do the right thing in the right space as well.
I think the powerhouses have the word fear in the back of their head. They're so afraid someone's going to do it first. Someone's going to do that more. The fear's got to be knocked out. Because now we are totally burnt out on having to get something done and everything done at one time, that there's enough room for everybody.
For sure.
Not just done as well, it's just kind of like this relentless appetite for newness as well. People put themselves under tremendous pressure to kind of throw away what happened before and really kind of, because they want to be talked about, they want to create content for us to all consume and talk about, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and I think that's what Raf kind of proves like consistently throughout his career.
And what is new? And what is old? It's irrelevant. It's what's good.
What's good.
And he delivers what's good. And you might even see something here that he's done 4 years ago, 5 years ago. You don't care because it's good.
It's not exactly the same. It's it's
He's never.
So
he's
time becomes
never.
like a bit like irrelevant at this stage, right? With Raf, because he can revisit ideas, but also when you see some of the collections that he has done back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're still so relevant.
And
So
fresh,
strong, so
right?
strong.
And fresh, so time is irrelevant. What about you, Steve?
As Steve is modelling today.
Yes, as Steve is
So
modeling.
yeah, I'm modelling.
Can you talk a
I'm
bit?
modelling jealous.
Can you talk a
New
bit-
Raf. So this is Spring Summer 18, which also references sort of 2003 collection,
Yes.
the Peter Saville collaboration. So it's got the new power and lies, corruption
You both have it.
motif on the back. We both,
Super
and I'm teaming it
jealous.
up with.
You should show the people at home.
Sorry, yeah.
your jacket.
I think you both.
It's already on
need to show
SHOWstudio.
your
It's already on
both.
SHOWstudio. It's already been photographed by Britt Lloyd.
Everything.
Yeah, and I've teamed that up with a piece from the Right collection from 2001.
Which was one of his, probably one of the times, I was reading this interview by Kathy Horing in New York Times back in 2005 actually, right when he was appointed for Gilles Sander, and she was saying at the point that Raf changed 3 times the menswear until that point, of course. One was in his early career when he came out like with a very kind of narrow suits, narrow tailoring, narrow shoulders. The second time was with Riot and in early 2001 with all the layering collections. And the third time was with the really high waisted trousers and Eisenhower jackets. So Raf has reinvented and has changed quite a lot of fashion, and this is what we see here. But what is your word that you're going to pick up?
What was the other 2? Creative freedom and what was the other one?
Challenge.
Challenge.
You'd love challenge, I think.
Well, I guess it is challenge because he is always challenging the system right from the very beginning. So like I said before, he didn't see a fashion that he could relate to. So he was challenging everything, like the Gucci, the prevalent thing was kind of like the Gucci kind of fashion. He was challenging that directly. So that's like the first challenge. And then he's kind of challenged throughout what he's done. And that goes, mentioning this collection. So it took a year sabbatical, so he wasn't afraid to take a year out. Took some time out for himself, where he was teaching in a design school in Antwerp, I believe, and was also kind of working with a rich shipping magnate in terms of like sort of consulting on his art collection.
Yeah.
It's so healthy to do that, to take time out.
Take
to
time
have
out
this,
to do
you
different
know.
things.
I think sometimes creatives now, myself included, but especially sort of creative directors, some are afraid to kind of step off the
Yeah.
sort of the wheel because they
It's
think
what Karen
if they
said
do,
about
then they can't come back.
isolation.
Exactly.
If you spend some time on your own, you're stabilising all your thoughts, because none of us stop for a minute to even process what we're living.
Yeah. But and also I think looking back to the question as well, the challenge. Talking about, you mentioned the kind of the 3 kind of moments he's really shifted the kind of the shape and silhouette of menswear. That's him kind of challenging himself as well. He doesn't want to be sort of pigeonholed into one angle. He's directly sort of really challenging himself to kind of push things forward, and that's always what he's kind of striving to do.
Do you think that is challenging though? I mean, not now, because obviously, Raf Simons is a hugely recognizable brand, but do you think that when he was starting and in the first, let's say, decade or 15 years, how difficult was to remain independent? That was a challenge probably, because the structure probably wasn't the same as it is right now. The challenges as being a young designer are not the same. Don't you think that throughout all these times, and I'm sure he had like his own difficulties as most of the young designers have, at this stage, he didn't think about, actually, if I wasn't independent, things would be much easier for me. Because he went through like, when the Gilles Sander appointment happened, he still was 10 years old as a brand, as a Raf Simons brand. So he was still young. So and back then the Gilles Sander brand was owned by Prada Group. So probably he could have done a deal like that, but he remained independent. But
But he's also used kind of opportunities to kind of to push himself forward. So when he took the sabbatical, one of the reasons why his design studio got too big, and he couldn't really control it, so he kind of really reduced it. And also on the flip side of that, got tweaked his production side, and he kind of got, I think he got some kind of like sort of sponsorship on that side, and changed producers.
a licensing agreement.
Exactly. So he's been very smart in that as well. So it's that kind of like a combination of being quite business savvy, but but not relinquishing any control, sort of creative.
Isn't it business savvy though, in a way, doing your own thing, I think, is a complete indulgence, an indulgence that we all deserve. And wanting to maintain his own independent atelier, whatever you want to call it, doing these business deals, that's almost like something he was smart enough to do to ensure that he could continue doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think with him it's ever vanity. I think it's just he wants to create. He wants to be doing
I mean,
it.
I mean, there's so many interviews throughout sort of the 90s and 2000s where he's kind of like pushing back on the title of fashion designer. He doesn't really see himself as a fashion designer. He just chooses fashion as his kind of chief medium to kind of explore these kind of creative ideas, which I think is interesting.
It's really nice. And creative freedom here?
I mean, I think he's got that creative freedom because, you know, there's no CEO or there's no commercial director telling him what to design, which has been the downfall of many companies recently. He also probably saw how Helmut Lang fell because, you know, he had that investment and lost his name. And I think that's really precious to him, is keeping his own name, definitely. So he's learnt those lessons and he's grown very slowly. And I think that's a really important thing for people today starting their own label. It's a really admirable thing not to sell out and want to be with a massive mega brand.
Or rushing. I think that's one of the things that we all.
But actually, it's paid off now because he's got a crazy wage at Calvin. So, you know, and he's got like a really nice setup.
What do you think that the challenges between the designers of Raf Simons status, that they design? I mean, because I think he's one of the few. I really was trying yesterday to think about like lots of other designers that do what Raf does, which is basically, you know, to design for a big house but also run his own independent brand. Can we think of anyone else actually? Because I was trying to think about it, that they haven't.
I mean, I see him as undercover. I see him like the undercover thing.
Okay.
But they don't have the big, you know.
Because you can find designers that they remain independent, like Dries, for example. He hasn't sold his brand, but he's not designing for someone else. But for someone to do both of these things, you know, I think he probably must be.
And to sustain it, that's what you call real depth of drive. He's got a lot to say. So he has the tools and he has the receipts to show that he can deliver. But I guess he delivers more than most because he kept his name.
Yes.
And he's allowed, like you said, he's allowed to do his own thing in his own way. That is the way forward. And that's why I was saying before about people saying that they're designers and they have a crew of people. No matter what you do, it's never the same feeling as when you own it and you know that your name's on it. You know, you have to deliver or you give up.
For sure.
He said something, I think, in an interview about, they asked him about Margiela, and he said he really admired that Margiela said what he had to say, and he said it's a wrap.
Yes.
And it looks like he's got a lot more to say, and hopefully we'll see a lot more come out of his own label, because like you say, when you're working for someone else, you got to follow a brief. And, you know, that's frustrating. That can break you down. That can destroy you.
With Calvin, I feel like he's proved that he doesn't need to stick to a brief. I think.
I agree.
I think the current CEO of Calvin is really modern thinking. He's thought, how can I solve this problem?
And he's kept it as
We're making money, but we're not quite where we should be, and we could probably double our profits and become a, you know, they were $1 billion company already. So how brave of that CEO to think, I'm going to give him as much creative freedom, and it worked.
Do you think
because he has,
do you think it's like super smart to do, because he was the only one that he could?
I think it's brave because for me, CEOs can fuck up companies. And backers, you know, we saw backers fuck up Vivienne Westwood in the 90s.
There is another side of that coin, though. If you know, it's really hard, because if you give a designer creative freedom, you know, without the mutual respect, you know, it can be terrible. I mean, they could just, you know, wipe the floor and just.
Yeah, he could have come in, taken millions of dollars and just
ruined it,
and run it into the ground.
But it's trust, and I imagine that before that relationship, you know, it wasn't like, oh, do you want this job? 3 months later sign. I reckon that was lots of meetings.
No, I think they were
A
talking
bit like
for
the
a
old school
long time.
Italians where they spend a holiday together to get to know each other, or the Chinese culture where they kind of watch each other, once they've met, so that they see how they behave and how it's going to work. But I think people forget that when you go to, when you have your own fashion label, it's very rudimentary. You kind of playing on favours. People come and help. You have to pick fabrics that you maybe don't want to use because you can't afford the more expensive one. But when you go to these big jobs, you forget the gear shift is shocking. I mean, straight away you want buttons. You've got probably somebody in charge of the buttons that comes and shows you this incredible archive. Well, what do you want? And it's like, oh my God. And actually, someone like Raf, he probably doesn't want to be spoilt like that. No. But to create the Calvin Klein, there's people in place to kind of help him be the best version of Calvin Klein he wants to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great. I mean, I was thinking also, because with Raf, he has a huge passion about art, basically, and almost every interview that I've read by Raf, he keeps mentioning all these artists that he's working very, very closely with. He's really admiring them and he really respects them. And I would like to discuss about between fashion and art, those two type of worlds, because let's see a bit about Raf Simons. He loves C.D. Sherman, George Condo. He has worked with Sterling Ruby in a number of occasions. They launched an extremely successful collection. He has worked on Dior. He has worked on Calvin Klein. He redesigned the store in New York. Then we have the Robert Mapplethorpe Foundation. We have Andy Warhol Foundation. And for his brand, and also for the other brands that he worked on Calvin Klein. Brian Calvin as well, that he did back in Spring Summer 13. He loves ceramics because he has referenced Paul Chambost, in collections with Gilles Sander, Georges Jouve. So he has a wide a huge respect for artists. And there's a big debate between fashion and art. Is fashion art, or can borrow elements from art, and how these two worlds?
I think you mentioned the big system interview that I'm sure we've all read, which was just incredible. How precious to be a fly on the wall with a conversation between Raf and Miuccia Prada.
Yes, that was amazing.
And I think in that interview, Miuccia Prada said that, she doesn't mind that her company is so big because fashion is her way of getting her creativity out there. It's almost her portal. And if that didn't work, she would become an artist.
For sure.
I think
she created the Fondazione though, so she has created the foundation basically, where she has all the artists that probably she respects and works with. So it's a very, very
It's interesting. I was talking to a fashion designer yesterday who is in the system. They're making a collection, they're going to Paris and all this, and they're feeling a bit, deflated with the whole thing. And I was saying, you need to create your own narrative. If you're so creative, if you wanted to have an art show and become an artist and turn this fashion into sculpture, you've got every right to do that. If that's going to help you breathe creatively. I think we're all creating our own narrative, and I think that that collection that you talked about, the Sterling Ruby, I mean, that was incredible because he actually called it Raf Simons and Sterling Ruby. He rebranded it. I mean, all those stores where he sells, their systems couldn't even cope with it because suddenly they had to call it a different label and they wanted something Raf.
You're so right, because that happened to us as well. So that happened to us, and it happened in a number of occasions. And this is something that we actually need to. It's so nice that you're mentioning that, because also when he did the Robert Mapplethorpe Foundation, he did exactly the same thing on the tag. He's a generous person. He gives almost like a blank canvas. Of course, it's a very intellectual design, goes always into his collections, but he gives a space to every artist.
In that interview, he did say, I think he'll go and design Prada?
Prada,
Would he go and design Prada or Marc Jacobs?
They were saying
Marc Jacobs will go and design Prada, and Miuccia will go and design Raf. And they actually thought, and Miuccia was so excited by that in the interview, and it's like, that they're stuck in the system where they can't quite do that. But actually, there's no rules anymore, so you can actually do that. And I can. They really thought that was the way forward to do. Not crazy.
I think it's a great
things,
idea.
but look how excited everyone
Yeah,
is.
that was exciting.
It writes its own press release, doesn't it? It's like, and it's hard to shift clothes sometimes.
Yeah.
What everyone thinks about this relationship between fashion and art.
I mean, I think it's important that today the new and upcoming designers and the people that are going to schools right now, I think he's a fantastic mentor to look towards, because he doesn't do things blindly. And it's not all over the place. It always has a very direct point of view. And with art will always help you have a more deeper and more valid point of view to express, because art, of course, is a reflection of popular culture. And I think with Raf, he always embraces popular culture when it's happening right then and there. When I'm looking at the last couple of collections and even the new one, you know, there's so many things that can excite me about that, and it can remind me of how important he's taking on board what's happening on the streets. And yes, there is a revival of this whole generation that he reflects here, the whole Warhol, Glenn O'Brien, TV party, you know, revelation, which of course I was a part of, somewhat.
What we all want to hear about.
What we love about you, Caroline.
we all want to hear about that. That's
What you were saying before was really interesting about what you thought Warhol would say if he came.
Yeah, I mean, I think Raf.
We're fortunate enough to know.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like I said before, it's all well and good to look online, which is unfortunately what our generation is right now. They look online on Instagram, and this whole thing of research. There's nothing that's 1 + 1 anymore, because you can't touch it. You can't touch Warhol. You can read all day long, but if you didn't sit down and speak to him, you'll never get that feeling, no matter what. I feel blessed to be my age, to have been able to experience that whole essence of what he was about. He was basically about being spontaneous. And he was one of the first sartorialists, besides Bill, which we live for. But he was one of the first sartorialists, and I think that's one thing that he pushed forward. The time that he would go out, where he would go, he would be on the street, he'd be at a party, whatever. He wouldn't seek out people who everyone thought was the right person to be with. He would seek out people that no one's looking at. He would see their light, and he would go there and he would let them know how big their light was. And I think that Raf, it engages that within his shows and within his collections. And now I've noticed too, the last couple of years, how diverse his casting has become. He has totally reflected the Americana. 200, like.
He hinted about that in an old interview, actually. I think Terry interviewed him in the late 90s, and he brought up the diversity issue because it is something that plagued him in his early years. And his response was, well, I grew up in Antwerp and there was no diversity. He said, if I'd have designed in New York, then my diversity, you know, it might be really diverse casting. And we're actually seeing that now that he's in New York and he's based in New York. The casting now mirrors that, so he's kind of true to his word. I thought that was quite interesting going back.
I think he has a lot of respect for things. Respect is something that really needs to be pushed right now, because there's no respect anymore. Everything's become a circus. I left New York when Warhol died. Why? Because there was no one else there to say, this is crap, and this is together. There's no one left. And it was all left up to kids from Scarsdale, as if. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, I did the Doors at that time, and the way I did Doors was to reflect what should happen inside. I was hard as nails, because I wanted to keep inside precious and sacred and fantastic and exciting. And I didn't want anyone to ruin it because their mind wasn't opened enough. And I think with Raf, I think he opens your mind and still keeps it authentic and makes you think about stuff. I'm looking at the Dickie update that he's just done with the sweater. And of course, we all know that that's a feeling right now, from Margiela to Vetements to Balenciaga. he still kept it tight, boo. Still,
Even though it's in the
Still
air, I
kept
think
it
he's
tight,
very
kept it
brave to be
attractive.
like, I'm going to do my version of it. Do you know what I mean?
He's not
Kept it
afraid.
He's not afraid of someone
tight.
saying, oh, well, it doesn't that look like last season's this, that. He doesn't give a shit.
It looks like him.
Yeah.
And I think that he manages to hold the strength of his name. It's all due to respect for art and respect for the space that people have when they're working with him.
Yeah, I think the key point is like sort of appropriation versus celebration. I think Karen, you kind of mentioned that there's a prevalence of our generation, or the next generation, kind of researching just purely online, not really living it. He really knows his, you know, he could talk for hours, I'm sure, about most of the artists that he works with. You get that he kind of really does put his kind of these passions and his loves on the actual sleeves of his garments, heart and sleeve of the garments. Yeah, for me, that's the big difference. He's a celebrator and he's a curator, and he's not afraid to share his name.
He's a curator. I mean, he's done also quite a few exhibitions and throughout like all his career, even on an early stage actually. You know, he took like the curation projects on him. But do you think that maybe it's a bit far-fetched? But do you think that the impact that Andy Warhol had, one day Raf Simons is going to have?
I think he already has it.
Yeah.
I think he's doing his best to make it his. He's not taking Warhol and putting the blonde wig on and saying, that's me, which unfortunately a lot of people are doing right now in the industry. They're taking something and putting their name on it as if it belongs to them. This is a disgrace, and this is something that Warhol would spit at. With Raf, I think he's taken on board the idea behind why Warhol existed. And it's to nurture authenticity, 100%. Hopefully, if he's going to continue working with the Warhol Foundation, I hope he travels out of the small world of the fashion teams and ventures out into people that actually knew Warhol, understood what his thesis was, understood his movement, because only then can he learn how to redevelop that within his own brand and his own name. But it's, you know, it's such a crowded space right now in fashion. Like I said, people are always pushed to work with just certain types of people. You have to step out of that realm.
Which is why I think that we're drawn to people that have got this soulful heart. The sort of designers that we go for. I mean, when he's been interviewed, he talks about how he doesn't understand why people, they all buy beautiful clothes, but they don't go beyond the surface of what the clothes look like. They're not bothered about the narrative or the reasoning or the inspiration, and he can't relate to that whatsoever.
He shouldn't have to. You know, there's enough room, like I said, for everybody to do what they have to do. Warhol represented radicalism. And no, this is not my answer for this question. You can accept it or not, doesn't matter. It's gonna stay here and it's gonna exist. And it might take a little time for you to understand it, but it's better to take that chance that they might not understand it right away. Because we all learn from things that we don't completely understand at first.
For sure. Oh, that's really great. So I think that we should go and talk a bit about the collection. Yes. So Youth in Motion.
Can you save me one of the T-shirts, please, when the order comes in?
Yes. So actually, we're going to talk a bit about the collection. Then I'm going to have like an aside order for like all the people here. You know, like putting already.
If you look,
I start speaking the numbers because everyone is asking about this one. So. As we said in the beginning, basically...
We've already driven you mad before this interview for the Raf Lantern.
Yes, yes. They asked me about the
someone just
lanterns as
texted
well.
you an order as well, I just read it.
So basically, looking at this collection, obviously, as we said in the beginning, we see two main features. One is Christiana F., is obviously, for whoever doesn't know, it's a book. It's a very famous book back in 1981, and of course it became also a movie. One of the most probably iconic ones, personally, I have read the book like about 15 times when I was like teenager, and I think it affected a lot of teenagers back in 80s and 90s, and it has been referenced hugely as a movie in many big campaigns and advertising campaigns and everything. So that's the one main feature. So that's why in the title in German was Wir Kinder auf der Bachung zu, and we see it on the collection. We see here the two actors actually that they played, and we're talking earlier, Steve, about that because one of the main actors, Thomas Haustein, who played Detlef, he gave a really amazing interview in Vice, and he was talking a bit about the whole experience, but you were saying to me that Christiane F., who is a real story, and Christiane is still alive?
Still alive, yeah. And she
gave an interview, right?
So the book itself was based on her life between the ages of 12 and 15, where she kind of fell into, in West Berlin, when she fell into heroin and prostitution, so it was a super young age. And Raf, when he first referenced Christiane F. in 2001 with the Riot collection, he said that he saw the film when he was 14. He said he was too young to see it, and it really kind of impacted him. And we think we can all relate to that when we're in our adolescence, coming of age, and we watch something that kind of changes our world. With, when we're probably too young for it, but it kind of propels us. And I think that's what happened for him personally with this film. But yeah, she talks. She gave an interview with Vice in 2013. She talked about her relationship with the film, and she wasn't actually personally a huge fan of it. She thought it kind of glamorized drug use a little bit, because the film itself, even though it's very, very dark, it has David Bowie did the soundtrack, and it's like Heroes plays throughout the trailer. It's like, so there is that element, same element with Trainspotting, where it's not actually glamorizing drugs, really, but it can be construed as that by certain sectors. And I think as adolescents, we're always kind of drawn to the kind of things that we shouldn't do anyway. Yes. So there is that kind of element to it. And she wrote a second memoir. So the film itself was based on her first memoir when she was basically speaking to journalists when she was like 16. And then she wrote one, it's called My Second Life. So it's kind of like what happened after that. And she had, she moved to New York for a little while, and she got kicked out of New York because she was found with various opiates on her purse, and she wasn't allowed back in. So she's actually, when the interview in 2013, she was actually living back in Germany. Okay. And she was saying that she hopefully that she wanted her second memoir to kind of be even darker and kind of put people to steal the message that drugs aren't to be messed with. And that's something that Raf was in the show notes is very, very keen to kind of to make sure of, that people are aware of, that he's not glamorizing drugs.
No. That's 100% sure.
Before the parents write it.
That's 100% sure. I mean, whoever doesn't know the Christiane F. book, basically the story is that it's actually a real story of Christiane F., who is like a German girl that she hangs out and she meets Detlef, who is like the two main protagonists pretty much, and then they have like a real group of people that is when heroin is for the first time appears, and everyone starts taking it, and then you see like this whole journey of going through like detox and try like to get out of it, and it's quite iconic and all, and of course it has because they need money for drugs, as normally happens, and then they start in prostitution, and is in this specific place that is called Bahnhof Zoo, is like a train station in Berlin. So that was the film, and that was the book about. And I think what to me was, when I was a teenager and I was reading that book, why I was so drawn into it was because they were real characters, they were real people, and in the book there are like all the images of them, that you can see them, you can differently relate to the whole situation. I mean, it's not like Alice in Wonderland that you're thinking about something like completely like different. So that's the one main reference. The second one is a book that is called Drugs by Cookie Mueller and Glenn O'Brien. Now, this it's actually a playwright that was written back in 1984 and 1995. And the book was published very recently in 2016 by Kingsborough Press. The book itself is a story between basically two main, again, characters and the group of friends that they go throughout different phases trying out different type of drugs, and then how the story ends with pretty much one of them sort of dies. So I'm saying sort of dies because it's not very clear in the book.
Yeah,
But I think he dies. This is what the meaning is. So you kind of like touch the subject. Is why Raf, you think, that all of a sudden chooses to touch that subject? You know, the subject of drugs, because drugs is the main characteristic, both in Christian F and in the book, of drugs. So why he's now commenting on it?
I think it's still a massive problem. It's a massive problem in America. He's in America. He's probably seen a lot more of America now, a lot more American TV, a lot more news than what he did before when he was in Europe. And I think this is reflecting what's going on in America, definitely. And how the massive problem is with crystal meth, and you know, it's not just heroin, it's ridiculous.
Well, so much of it stems from prescribed drugs as well, and that's what he mentions in the press release as well, because they start on prescribed drugs, they run out, and then they go down and they go to heroin, they go to crystal meth, they go to
You hear about it in the media regularly now, people that were on heavy painkillers and then they get addicted to them. And what have you.
And I think he, I could be completely wrong.
Yes.
I think he does this type of thing, like, okay, for instance, you could say drugs in so many different ways. Why does he choose the Glenn O'Brien play?
Yes.
I think it's because he's urging youth culture to start reading again. I think, and start re-educating themselves on other subcultures and the end result. You know, I think, for instance, this play that Glenn O'Brien was a part of, and if you ever watch Glenn O'Brien online, which is what you can only do right now, his subculture ideas were incredible because he took them from first-hand points of view. And with Raf, I think this whole reason behind, and I'm looking at the collection right now, the stamp of drugs, it's not just to say drugs, like read why I put this here. This is an educational point of view now. Where does it come from? Oh, it comes from the Glenn O'Brien play, which means you have to go online, or you have to go into a shop, you have to actually read a book about it.
Because it's so
if you can find it as well. If you can find it and spend a lot of money on finding it. But
Everybody wants to be down, so they'll find it.
that's a little common, basically, because the book itself was, and this is why it became sold out instantly. It was a limited copy of 500, and it was costing $20, because the price was that this is how much it costs if you go out in the street and buy a dose for drugs. So you shouldn't. So people shouldn't pay more money actually to get that book. That was the whole concept behind it, and I think there is a discussion that probably something is going to happen again with that book, and profits and earnings, as you said, is going to go like to
The profits from this collection
are
going to go to a lot of charities.
to a lot of charities. So I completely agree with your point, actually, that he's sending a message of like educational message, actually, you know, go and read about it before you start, you know, getting involved with it, or we start doing it. You know, I don't think he ever says do it or don't do it. He just says, you know, go and search for it.
It's suggestive. You know, it's like, get your shit together.
I don't think Instagram's going to be how it feels.
These are all quite cult things. Like that movie was very cult. You know, the book had a cult. You know, the people around it were very cult. So this is like tapping into that culture. And I think that when you see, you know, these references in the show, like LSD on a kneecap patch, on the trousers, or even just the word drug bandied around, you know, you do want to know more. You're not just going to think, oh, the word drug. In this show, you want to dig deeper into that narrative.
For sure.
I also think America needs it. I think the American public and the youth culture right now are lost. And I think they've gotten so involved in what they see on Instagram, opposed to going out and getting involved in something that actually matters. And I'm so happy that someone like him has taken on the most American company. Calvin Klein, you don't get more American than that. And what he is saying is, yes, I'm here, but I'm going to push you cats to do what you used to do. I'm going to take you back to the days of Glenn O'Brien, where they actually did things because they had a desire to do it, and they had something to say. And I feel that Americans forget that they have a lot more to say now. Take the iPad and put it under the table, boo. Start going out. Start doing what you have to do.
Karen, in that period when you were living in New York, there was a lot of pain and suffering. You know, a lot of people lived down Lower East Side, which was like you know, which was really bad back then. I mean, we've seen
it was attractive. I'm going to be realistic. It was sexy, it was hot, it was attractive.
Yeah, but the undertones when I've read books about that era, you know, and I think, you know, these are cultural themes that, you know, it's just great that he's tapping into that.
Oh, he's bringing it back because there's a reason to bring it back. Why? Because there's a lot going on right now that the youth culture can actually grab a hold of and do something with. And I think he's projecting that push to them. He's not, like you say, doesn't tell them what you do, and just brings it in your headspace to say,
in the table.
what do you think about this? And I think the intelligence of that is genius, and I hope that more designers are looking at what he's trying to portray through being a designer of a new house. Just because you go into a new house doesn't mean only numbers. It means at the end of the day, what is the real heavy-duty statement? When you buy into a brand, why do you buy into it?
The message.
Because of the message and because of you want that association of being fabulous too.
The belonging,
But just going back to New York back then.
Okay, you want to go back there?
I didn't really explain myself very well. I just mean that, you know, we all see the glamorous stuff and all the cult stuff, and there's all these great references, but even when I read Yaya Kusama's biography, you know, she talked about the scene. There's such a fine line between being part of this glamorousness and actually going under and falling victim to it, and the destructive side of it.
That's always what
It's
Raf's
like you
always
go
been attracted to, that sort of dark.
Yes.
You go right to the edge of it, and I think that's really fascinating.
I mean, because I was, and that's probably why I'm sitting here, because I was a really close friend and muse of Basquiat, of Jean, I learned the depth of how 1 minute everything that you're doing can be amazing, but because of drugs, you can actually die while you're doing it. And Jean was incredible to use as a thesis on this. Why? Because he bought his first place just across the street from the homeless shelter, because he never wanted to forget where he came from. Not that he came from the homeless shelter, but he spent a lot of time there. Why? Because that was a time of drug addiction, heavy. There was a time where it was him, it was John Lurie, and I don't know if Glenn O'Brien was on that type of tip, but you know, it was all about weed for him, wasn't it? But they all superly indulged in drugs in order to create Remelzy, who is the king, and I bowed down, and I was lucky enough to be around them, and the reason it was so weird. The reason why I was drawn to them is because I had a brother who was a drug addict. I'm from Brooklyn, in the worst area you could possibly imagine, and because of that, I used to dream about getting out of it. How do you get out of it? You get out of it in a creative medium. And it's so weird how I was attracted to these people. They were all totally off their face. And we're not talking joint, we're talking heroin. It was a train spotter all day, every day. But at least from that, they were able to create something, because they, within the fact that they were totally stoned off their face, the dream was always still there. And I used to pray that, you know, one day someone's going to say, the drug stuff has just got to stop because you're going to die. I remember saying to Jean, I don't want to read about you one day. Artist found dead in studio, and it happened. So that was the reality of what was going on, because he always thought he would end up back in the homeless shelter. He thought he was 2 steps from it, and that was the reality of the 80s.
It was like a kind of reminder to him the whole time to just keep that in mind, you know.
Right across the street.
Don't lose your focus.
That's cool. So, shall
Love
we
all
go
the
back to
laser show.
Me too.
I know, right? Okay, let's talk a bit about like the set,
yeah.
the music, and also, you know, the whole vibe of it. So, first of all, I have to say that I love when Raf goes back to do shows that everyone is standing and it's almost like a club, because he's done it quite a few times. And then I saw the previous shows that he had a city show when he went like in New York, and I'm really happy that he's back in that type of format.
You all know how
like,
ridiculous it is at a fashion show where people are, you know, you get like editor chief complaining because they're sitting in the wrong seat or something. It's such a circus. But ultimately, we're there. Raf just democratizes the whole process. But everyone's on a level. Everyone is there to appreciate, and that's what it's all about.
Grace Bonner had a standing show 2 seasons ago. It was great. You really you just have this intimacy, and also you're almost like the model's there next to you. And
If possible, it should either be all like one row or standing, or
Yes.
everyone standing.
I mean, I think that, you know, when he started doing that format, I think it was really, really amazing because he normally picks up like these warehouses, big spaces, put laser shows in there, makes it almost like as a rave techno party basically, and then, you know, the models are walking on these platforms and you can see them from every single angle, but also you feel more intimate in there. You know, you feel that you're part of the space, you're part of the set, you're part of, you know, the whole. Yes, and not so much about just sitting and viewing from a distance, the whole thing.
So not only that, for this set as well. I mean, it's kind of following it online last night where people were. And
Well, what time do you go to bed?
The set's difficult. You can't sleep when Raf's there.
Yeah.
You can't sleep on Raf. But the set itself is like a Flemish kind of painting.
Yes, it is.
Like, echoing back to his Antwerpian roots.
Yes.
People were like wondering whether they could eat
The
the
ticket?
set, and
they're actually being encouraged to do that.
The PR consultant were going around
Waffles.
and encouraging people. There was like red wine there. There were like charcuterie boards. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
Molly Goddard did that as well. She had like food and stuff like one of her shows with the Big Bang
That
Theory.
interaction, because there's always that thing where you're kind of watching a show, but you don't really feel part of it. But Raf really, you know, he, not only are they within touching distance of the garment, they can be part of the set and they can, you know, part of the whole narrative. And another thing to mention on the actual set itself, that, I mean, there was a crazy amount of food throughout, but rather than waste it, it was donated to City Harvest, which is like kind of a New York charity which gives food to the homeless.
I mean, to me, this is what Warhol would have done. This looks like a party in the factory. He would have said, right, whoever gets here first, they're getting a seat, or they're getting in the front. Too bad if you're too late. And I think that point of view is everything. I mean, the fact that he went through the trouble of the set, but like you said, the interactiveness of it, the rawness of it, it really feels like you're in 1981. If that makes any sense.
It feels like a complete art installation as
Yeah,
well. You know,
yeah, you really do.
You know, if you take
And I
these
feel like
shows
that's
away.
where he'll go. I don't think he'll be Raf Simons, the menswear designer, forever. I think he'll be an artist towards the
Hopefully he
end.
can do both.
I think he's
I wouldn't want him to do
probably
helmet and just kind of disappear from fashion, because
both.
No.
Probably,
all like that.
you know, he might create like a foundation, you know, someday that is going to be all.
You know what's really interesting about this too is there's a club from the 80s and the 90s called Area. And it was curated by Serge Becker and a few others. I say Serge Becker because I think he was the genius, and he's still holding it down in New York. Anything that happens that's great there, he does it. And every 2 months, they would change the decor of the club, so it would become interactive, just like this.
Yeah, they had like real meat carcasses hanging around the club one time, and
It was amazing. I used to do Saturday nights once in a while there, and I would bring a whole nother set of people in. But it reminds me of that scene of where, you know, your show is your art forum. And I think it's great.
Diane Pernay always said to me, she said, Mandi, if you were in New York then, you wouldn't have been at Studio 50. We'd have been at Area.
Yeah, you because you had walls and rooms of people eating and serving each other and having sex and God knows what else. But I just think that he's really, at least he's taken a feeling of that time, still makes it his own. That's so difficult.
There's a kind of little subliminal message as well with all the flowers as well, because at the end of Dior, you know, it was very moving because it was his last show and it was very emotional, and they had all those flower installations, so this kind of has a little bit of join the dots going on too.
But also looking at the outfits, and I mean, we've seen the collection, and what is pretty amazing with these ones is that he also goes back to something that is very, very important to him, which is fabrics. Raf is very, very focused on, you know, textures and fabrics, and he's very, very specific into it. And I don't know how much we can see from the images here, but all these are silk and satins, actually, you know, the trousers and the inside of the garments, you know, actually, you know, when you open them, they have like lots of lots of pockets, you know, from inside, and padded ones, yeah, and it's all about the inner as well as, you know, the out. So that
Which
type,
actually, Jake Sando was always about.
Yeah.
Remember in the little atelier.
So you can see it here on the black coat, yeah.
The alteration ladies always said that, you know, if you said, oh, which designer is the best designer, so Jill Sander, you can wear it inside out, you wouldn't even be able to tell, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, so he's doing all these like beautiful fabrics also, the collection, and also the shapes and the trousers, the silk ones. It's a beautiful, beautiful collection. Do you have favorite outfits from what you see around right now? Which are your favorite
Looking
picks?
at the purple and black jumper over the
I
white.
want to hear.
That's on Andrew's list.
Yeah. Yes.
I like a print, obviously.
And I just think it's
So,
great.
so you like the pants with the knee pads, right? Yeah, aesthetically.
I like the vibe of
What
it.
about you, Karen?
I'm the Dickie jumper. It's everything. The color, the usage of the knitwear. Knitwear is so difficult to do beautifully. And I think his knitwear is exquisite. I think it's elegant and it's hardcore and just the color excites you.
What about you, Steve?
My personal favourite is actually the kind of like the tailoring in the beginning.
Me too.
Quite early on, because that's something we haven't really seen him kind of touch upon really.
I agree.
And that kind of is an echo to his early years, I think, so 90s. There's an element of what he was doing at Jill Sander as well, but you know, potentially. But
There's a beautiful like type of very narrow shoulder suit that is going to be a completely new way of doing things, and I think it's in this collection. It looks absolutely beautiful. I think it's going to change again the shape of how guys get dressed.
and I also love the patches, but the Christian F ones.
Yeah, the patches
There's
are
two
everything.
characters on both legs. I think that's great.
I think the outerwear is genius because it's that mix between it's like a formal piece of outerwear, but then it actually, you know, it looks like a lot of his earlier outerwear, which of course is the thing that I've collected over the years.
And the gloves, I can really use a pair of them.
Yeah, no, he's got the little Virgin
Loves the
fetish
killer. Yeah,
vibe
love
that
it.
the Undercover had at their picture.
I like that it's fetish, but also it could be, it's like a higher couture sleeve, so it's almost like couture as well, that 50s.
Well, it looks like his gender update is fantastic
sure.
too.
Gender
because-
update, I love it.
I love that.
Karen. That's a tea. Virgil's going to be nicking that.
It's an update, isn't it? It's cute. No, his gender update is Fantasia. Why? Because it's letting you know I'm a boy, but I'm a boy, but I'm a boy with a girl and a boy. Like, it's a total boy-girl sensuality that is just, it's attractive. But it is an update. Because people think gender is meaning a guy has to wear makeup to have a female side. That's got nothing to do with anything.
You're absolutely right. So I think we're coming to an end, and probably my final question is going to be a critical one. Do we think that Raf Simons is above any hard criticism? Is he, when he has become that designer, that can we criticize, or it's very, very difficult to do? Because obviously we had like this lovely conversation today, but do we feel that can we criticize anything in that sense?
I would probably say whoever would criticize what Raf does is someone that is not opening their mind enough to art and its involvement in fashion. And I don't think he cares anyway, if there is any criticism. I think everybody will receive
I think he's at that
criticism.
place where Helmut Lang was before money got involved, backers, interference and being bought out. I think that creative freedom is really important. I think the minute that switches, you lose it. And I think at the moment, no one can touch him. And everyone copies him.
Everyone.
To a level.
Yeah, this might not last forever, but at the moment, I think he is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
And maybe that creative freedom is the one thing that keeps him from going down the wrong route.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think no one is safe in this business. So if what they're producing is not amazing, they're not free from criticism. I mean, someone like Miuccia Prada, who is you know a goddess, still gets criticised from time to time now because people are questioning, oh, is she relevant? Raf is this time and in recent times has been ridiculously relevant. You know.
Well, on that note, we should say, first of all, congratulations on Raf Simons for delivering
Yeah.
one more
Fantastic.
fantastic collection.